I think we seriously overcomplicate what it means to be a good communicator. You don't necessarily need to become more confident, more articulate, or learn how to use words better. Sometimes you literally just need to know what you're trying to say before you start saying it. So today, I don't want to give you 5 generic communication tips that you'll probably forget by tomorrow. I actually want to go through a few exercises with you, and I want you to take one real situation from your own life and work on it while we're going through this. Before we do anything, I want you to think about one conversation you've had recently where you walked away thinking, I really didn't communicate that well. It could have been with your manager, a colleague, a client, a friend. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. But I want it to be something real because it's much easier to understand communication when you're looking at something you've actually experienced rather than some hypothetical situation I'm giving you. Maybe you disagreed with someone, but you didn't really say it. Maybe you needed something from your manager and spent 5 minutes explaining the situation without asking for what you needed. Maybe you just sent a message to a person and completely misunderstood what they were trying to say. Or maybe you just walked out of a meeting and thought, I could have explained that so much better. So can you think of one? And if you can, keep it in your head because we're going to use the same situation throughout the video. And don't try to fix it yet. I just want you to remember what happened and more importantly, what you were actually trying to communicate. Now, the main thing I want you to take away from this entire video is actually written right here. Clarity over cleverness. Because I don't really think good communication is about having the biggest vocabulary in the room, and I don't think it's about sounding incredibly sophisticated every time you speak. I think a lot of communication problems happen because we start talking before we've actually decided what we want the other person to understand. So before an important conversation, there are 3 things I think about. The first is simply, what's my point? And if I had one sentence and couldn't give you the entire backstory, what am I actually trying to say? Then what is my ask? When this conversation is over, what do I need the person to know, decide, or do? Because you'd be surprised how many meetings happen where everyone talks for an hour, everyone has an opinion, everyone leaves, and nobody really knows what happens next. And then the third thing is, what's the risk? Because obviously, I'm not telling you to walk around saying whatever comes in your head with absolutely no filter. There are situations where being too blunt can damage a relationship. But there are also situations where being so vague that nobody understands you, what you want, entirely create a different problem. Good communication is somewhere in between. So now let's do a quick exercise. Now go back to the situation you thought about earlier and ask yourself, what did I actually want that person to understand? And I want you to answer that one in one sentence. Just what you actually wanted them to understand. If that's difficult to answer, then that might already explain why the conversation didn't go particularly well. Now, this brings me to probably my favorite exercise in the whole video, because it's so simple, but it immediately shows you how much unnecessary language we put around the things we're actually trying to say. Think of something you've been avoiding saying. Maybe you need to tell your manager that you don't have enough time. Maybe you disagree with someone's recommendation. Maybe someone hasn't delivered something you need. Maybe you need to give someone feedback that you know they probably don't want to hear. Whatever it is, I want you to try to say it in one sentence. And here's the important part. For the first version, don't worry about making it sound nice. We're going to do that afterwards. First, I just want you to know what you actually mean. So instead of I feel like maybe we should talk about the project sometime, because I'm slightly worried about whether we'll be able to meet the deadline. What you actually might mean is, I need the deck by Thursday or I can't hit the client deadline. Now, would I necessarily say it like that in every single situation? Probably not, but it depends on the person and the context. But at least now I know what I'm trying to communicate. And once I know that, I can decide how I want to say it. So pause the video for a second and write 2 things. What I almost said, write the version you would naturally send, then underneath it, what I actually mean, and give yourself one sentence, that's it. Now look at the first sentence again and see whether you've hidden the point behind words like maybe, I feel like, if possible, I was wondering, perhaps we could. And I'm not saying these words are bad, because they're not, and sometimes you absolutely should use them. What I want you to notice is whether you're choosing those words deliberately because the situation requires, or whether you're using them because you're uncomfortable saying what you actually mean. And there's a big difference. Now, let's actually practice this, because I don't think you become a better communicator by watching videos about communication in the same way that you don't become good at presenting by watching other people present. So I'm going to give you 3 situations. And before I tell you what I would say, I want you to actually answer them yourself. Let's look at situation 1. Your manager tells you, I think we should recommend option A to the client. You've done the analysis and you genuinely believe option B is better. What do you say? Give yourself a few seconds. Now, you could spend 2 minutes trying politely hint that maybe there's another possibility, or you could simply say, I actually see it differently. Based on the analysis, I think option B is stronger because of X and Y. Can I quickly walk you through what I'm saying? You're disagreeing, but you're not being disrespectful. And I think that's something people sometimes confuse. Being clear and being rude are not the same thing. Situation 2. Your manager gives you another task at 5 p.m. and asks you to finish it tonight, but you already have another deliverable that needs to go out as well tonight. What do you say? I think a lot of us, especially when we're junior, we immediately say, yeah, sure, I'll try my best. And then spend the next 6 hours panicking. But there's another way to communicate it. You could say something like, I can take this one, but I won't realistically be able to finish both tonight. So which one would you like me to prioritize? And I really like this example because you're not confusing to do the work, or you're not refusing to do it. You're simply making trade-off and make it visible for the person who owns the priority to make the decision. Now, situation 3. Someone on your team has sent you their work late several times, and it's now starting to affect your own deadlines. What do you say? You could say, I've received the last 2 deliverables later than we agreed, and it's starting to affect my own deadline. So can we agree on an earlier handover going forward? Again, it's not aggressive. It's just very difficult to misunderstand. Now, there's another exercise I really like doing when I'm struggling with how to phrase something, which is to write 2 completely different versions of the same message. First, write the version that's way too soft, the version where you're trying so hard not to offend anyone that the actual point almost disappears. Then write the version that's way too sharp, no cushioning, no diplomacy, just exactly what you're thinking. And then look at the 2. Usually, the communication you actually want is somewhere in between. And I think this distinction is really important because I'm not trying to teach you to become more blunt. I'm trying to get you to know exactly what you want to communicate first, and then deliberately decide how you want to communicate it. Because that's very different from accidentally being fake. Now, I want you to think about your own communication, and I want you to be quite honest with yourself here, because most of us have a pattern. Maybe you over-explain where someone asks you a simple question and you feel like you need to give them every piece of context before you're allowed to give them the answer. Maybe you over-soften where every request somehow turns into a question because you don't want to sound demanding. Maybe you avoid the actual task where you explain the entire problem beautifully, but never actually tell the other person what you need from them. Or maybe you're on the opposite side and you're sometimes too blunt where the message is very clear, but you haven't really thought about how the other person is going to receive it. So which one sounds most like you? And don't choose the one you wish you were. Think about your actual conversations, because once you know what your pattern is, you can start catching yourself doing it. And if you over-explain, remind yourself. Answer first, context second. If you over-soften, write the clear version first and then soften it deliberately. And if you avoid the ask, finish by telling them exactly what you need. And if you're too blunt, remember that clarity doesn't mean removing empathy from the conversation. And this is a very small takeaway that I need from you. It's like a homework. And I don't want the homework from this video to be something like practice communication better this week, because you're probably never going to do that. So I want you to do one very specific thing. Sometime this week, before you send a message that actually matters to you, stop for 1 minute and write what I almost said and underneath what I actually mean. Then look at both and write the version you actually want to send. And after you send it, come back later and write one more thing. What happened? Did they understand you faster? Did they respond differently? Did the conversation feel uncomfortable? Did you get what you actually needed? Because that's how you start getting better at communication. You practice on real situations, you see what happens, and you adjust. And I think the simplest way to summarize everything we've talked about today is actually the line on this slide. Say what you mean the first time, not the third. And again, that doesn't mean saying everything that comes into your head. And it doesn't mean becoming the person in the office who's brutally honest with everyone and then calls it communication. It simply means taking a second before you speak and asking yourself, what am I actually trying to say here? What does this person need from me? And what do I need from them? Because once you're clear about that in your own head, communication becomes much easier. And if you went through these exercises and realized that communication is something you genuinely struggle with, or maybe you're struggling with it, but you can't really identify what you're doing wrong, that's exactly the kind of thing we work together at CHQ. You don't need to come to us and say, I want to improve my communication skills. Come with something real. Maybe you have an important presentation next week. Maybe you're struggling to communicate with your manager. Maybe you have a difficult stakeholder. Maybe you keep getting feedback that you're too detailed or too concise enough and you don't know how to fix it. Bring us the actual situation and we'll work on that. Because communication is very difficult to improve in theory. You get better by actually doing it. And that's it for this consulting blueprint. I'll see you in the next one.